Lesson 9.5, Solving Quadratic Equations by Using the Quadratic Formula. In this video, you will learn to solve quadratic equations by using the quadratic formula and use the discriminant to determine the number of solutions of a quadratic equation. So, quadratic formula and discriminant are your vocabulary. And so what we want to talk about first is the quadratic formula. This over here is the quadratic formula. The way you use it is you need to know the a, b, and c. So a is always the coefficient on x squared, b is always the coefficient on x, and c is always the constant. So if I had something, for example, 3x squared plus 2x minus 5, a is 3, b is 2, and c is negative 5. If I had something like negative 2x squared plus 7, a is negative 2, b is 0, and c is 7. Okay, so let's try and use one of these to solve. So, by the way, you need to memorize this formula. Okay, so first thing I need to do is I need to get everything onto one side. So I'm going to rewrite this as x squared minus 2x minus 35 equals 0. So then I can specify what each of my values are. A is the number in front of x squared. If there's nothing there, it's technically 1. B is the number in front of x, so that's negative 2. And c is the constant, so negative 35, once it was already on the other side. Okay, so I have my a, b, and c, and now I'm plugging them into my formula, which is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, then that whole thing divided by 2 times a. So plugging in each of my values, I'm 1 for a and 2 and for c. So I'm going to have a negative 2, and then it's plus or minus the square root. B squared is negative 2, so we're putting in negative 2 again for minus 4 times a, 1, and times c, which is 35, negative 35. Okay, so that whole thing gets raised, that gets those under the square root, and we're dividing by 2 times a, and then we go through and simplify everything we can. So a negative 2 is a positive 2, plus or minus the square root. Negative 2 squared is 4. 4 times 1 times negative 35 is 35 times 4 is 140. So I have 2 negatives, which makes it positive. So it's going to be plus 140 over 2 times 1 is 2. So this becomes 2 plus or minus the square root of 144 over 2. Square root of 144 is 12, so I have 2 plus or minus 12 over 2. So 2 plus 12 is 14 divided by 2 is 7. And 2 minus 12 is negative 10 divided by 2 is going to be negative 5. So you get 7 and negative 5 are your values for x. Okay, so this is the quadratic formula. So if I'm doing this one, we're going to go through. Everything's already on one side, so I don't have to worry about that. My a is 2, my b is negative 2, and my c is negative 5. So I'm just plugging all of those things into my quadratic formula, which is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, and then that whole thing divided by 2 times a. So putting in negative 2 for b, I get negative 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 2 squared minus 4 times a is 2, and times c is negative 5. And then this whole thing divided by 2 times a, which is 2. Simplifying, negative 2 is positive 2, plus or minus. Negative 2 squared is 4. 4 times 2 is 8 times 5 is 40, and there's 2 negatives, so it's going to become positive, so plus 40. And we are dividing by 4. So I get 2 plus or minus the square root of 44 over 4. So the square root of 44 is 6.63 about. So we're going to have 2 plus or minus 6.63 over 4. So I do 2 plus 6.63 divided by 2, and I get 4.3 about. That says to go to the nearest tenth. So we're just going to stop at 0.3, even though there's more decimals. So that's one answer. And then I'm doing 2 minus 6.63 divided by 2, and I get x equals negative 2.3. And again, we're going to stop at the 10th decimal. Okay, so that is the answer for A. For B, again, we're going to get everything onto the one side. So I'm going to have 5x squared minus 8x minus 4 equals 0. And we want to plug all of that into the quadratic formula, which is negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Okay, so I'm going to go through and plug those in. You guys can do the same. Okay, so plugging in a, b, and c, you should get this. And then you want to start going through and simplifying. So try that now. So after simplifying a little bit more, you should get to this point, which is 8 plus or minus 12 over 10. So 8 plus 12 is 20 divided by 10. You would get x equals 2. 8 minus 12 is negative 4. So negative 4 over 10 reduces to negative 2 over 5. So those are your two solutions. Okay, for this one, we could use other methods. We don't necessarily have to use the quadratic formula, but we want to see if it's factorable, because factoring is going to be faster than quadratic formula a lot of the times. So we want to see if this thing is going to factor. So first step in solving, always get it equal to 0. So I want to see if I can do 3 times negative 12, I get negative 36. Are there factors of negative 36 that add to negative 5? And I can say, well, negative 9 and 5, sorry, negative 9 and 4, multiply to negative 36 and add to negative 5. So I can think of this as 3x squared minus 9x plus 4x minus 12 equals 0. And I can factor this by grouping, by pulling out 3x, and I'm left with x minus 3. And I can pull out 4 here, and I'm left with x minus 3 equals 0. So I get 3x plus 4 times x minus 3 equals 0. And so I would get x equals negative 4 over 3 from this one by solving when I said equal to 0, and x equals 3 from this one. So this was faster than trying to plug it into the quadratic formula. But you could solve this using the quadratic formula also. So you could use negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so altogether, these are the different methods that we've learned for solving quadratic equations. The first one was factoring. So we use when a constant term is 0 or the factors are easily determined. So like if it factors nicely, this is the fastest method. You can use graphing if you want to approximate a solution. If you just want to quickly graph it and see what it looks like, you can use graphing. But generally, graphing is not the method we're going to use. You can use square roots. So like if you have without a b term, so that's like with no x term, using square roots works well. You can learn use completing the square, which we did last section, and now we just learned quadratic formula. So We want to use a discriminant. A discriminant is a good way to see which method to use, because if the discriminant gives you a whole number or a perfect square, that means it's going to be factorable, and that might be the fastest way to do it. So what is a discriminant? A discriminant is the inside part of the square root when you're doing this quadratic formula. So remember, negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac over 2a. This part inside. Right there. So b squared minus 4ac. So if you do b squared minus 4ac and you get a negative answer, that means that there are no intercepts, or there are no real solutions. Okay? If you do b squared minus 4ac and you get equals 0, that means there's one solution. That means the x-intercept is going to be right on the axis, and that's one solution. If you get a positive number for b squared minus 4ac, that means there's going to be two solutions. It could be from a graph that's going up like that, or and have solutions there and there. Okay, but it just means there's going to be two real solutions. So we want to determine the number of real solutions this graph has, which means I want to do negative, or b squared minus 4ac. That's my discriminant. So in order to do this, I need to get everything on one side. So I have 3x squared plus 10x minus 12. So that means my a is 3, my b is 10, and my c is negative 12. Okay, so I'm plugging each of those things in. So 10 squared minus 4 times 3 times negative 12. I get 100 plus 12 times 12 is 144, so 144. Because when I do this, I get 244, which is a positive number. That means there are two real solutions. Okay, and that's the end of the section. If I had gotten a negative number here, that means that there's no real solution. And if I had gotten 0, that means 1. All right. Good.